The Main Intelligence Directorate, GUR, of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine has officially demonstrated for the first time the use of the 5V-28 anti-aircraft missile from the S-200 anti-aircraft missile system. As Defense Express analysts write, it took 2 years from the moment of its first known use, when a then unknown missile flew over Taganrog in July 2023, and more than a year to destroy Russian A-50 DRLV aircraft and a Tu-22M3 long-range bomber, which was shot down on April the 19th, 2024 at a record range of 308 kilometers. They note that the video released contains several important points that explain some aspects of the real resurrection of elements of the Soviet SAM system from the 1960s. In particular, the launch was carried out using a standard stationary FP-72V launcher and not, as was previously believed, a newly created mobile version. Moreover, the footage shows that these missiles were launched from these locations more than once, which is directly indicated by traces of the jet engines on the ground. At the same time, old launch positions were obviously used to launch these missiles, the experts write. According to them, all this shows how risky these operations were, because the launch pad is absolutely immobile and there is simply no way to escape from the attack. At the same time, preparations for the launch are carried out directly at this launch pad, during which the missile is filled with fairly toxic liquid fuel, which requires the use of a chemical protection suite. Analysts noted that the missile itself had not undergone any changes externally, but all possible changes concerned only the electronics, which could well have been redesigned. Possible options include using a different target illumination radar for the standard semi-active homing head, or installing a new active radar homing head, or optionally a passive one in the event of the A-50 being shot down, they concluded. In any case, the operations involving the use of 5V-28 by the Ukrainian Defense Forces are not only unique, but also significantly riskier than could have been previously imagined. The Times previously reported that the daring tactics of Ukraine's air defense, honed over several years of planning, dealt a significant blow to Russia's once dominant air force. Soviet-era missiles were used during the ambushes. A senior Ukrainian military intelligence officer revealed details of the joint operation with the Air Force to journalists. Thus, in May 2022, Ukraine decided to restore the S-200 system and use it at the front. First, they found officers who had previously operated these anti-aircraft missile systems, and then engineers who could restore them. The first launch took place in the fall of 2023, but the missiles missed their targets due to a change in the A-50's flight trajectory. However, the military claimed that the operation still had positive effect.
Найпростішим способом лову раків вважається лов руками. Хоча рак часто намагається чинити опір, тому продовженням рук пілота під час травневої хробачої раколовні є жало звичайне українське. Тра-та-та, хробак! То жало. Києві, мазафака! Рак-хробак нерідко лізоний одненький, уважні помітили там ще одного. Тож час не гаючи збираємо усіх. Звісно, раколовку було підготовлено заздалегідь, щоб ніякий окунь на броні не швендяв, і то облаштовувалося спосіб. Ну а рак-хробак, повзучий штурмовий, вже став додатковим субпродуктом того лову, перетворившись на різновид промислу на йоблика. Хробак став раком і пішов боком, гріх не включити режим патрулюрен у тому рибному місці. Точніше, містку. Прошу пана, гребе наступний. Чого одненький? але вправний, мабуть, пітерський, до розводних мостів призвичайний. Далі кумедно, почувши наближення дрона, Хробак розпочав генеральну репетицію сцени «Бобік здох». Хибна тактика, Хробак. Нам то не жени, як каже Колом. Наїбуть ти тут не пролізе. Пілоти Кліматим, птахів Мадяра викривали ті вистави, коли ти ще вдома на печі сидів. І краще для тебе, щоб ти там і далі сидів. Але ти приперло сюди. І точно не життєдайна, але умиротворяюча, детоксикуюча з вогником, я б сказав, у дупі. Якщо вам здається, що раколовку скомпрометовано трійкою йобликів, то ви помиляєтеся. Наступні потенціали не забарилися протягом хвилин 25-30. Жало на поготові, хробачня збентежена, тому знерухомлена і негайно відпиздошена. Дивимося. Там попередник попереду ще підкурює, а вище наступник диму пускає. Але їх було двоє. Рак йоблико потенційний у момент зустрічі з загрозою стискує не лише очечо, але й сам шукає мушлю. Таку мушлю ви ще не бачили. Увага! Інсталяція з декораціями. Рак бетоноволь. Просвітницький проєкт «13 йобликів» у етері. Другий сезон, частина 36. Поїхали!
On the territory of the temporarily occupied Crimea, the Ukrainian defense forces regularly destroy Russian air defense systems, which is why the peninsula has turned into a kind of black hole for expensive air defense systems. This is stated in an article by a military political observer on Obozrevatel media outlet. In particular, the analyst noted that the Russian Black Sea Fleet and the Kerch Bridge are often mentioned in the context of military actions in Crimea. However, recently the temporarily occupied peninsula itself has become the main target for the Ukrainian armed forces, which has become the main site for the destruction of Russian air defense. According to him, this year it was in Crimea that the largest number of air defense systems were destroyed than in any other section of the front or on Russian territory. However, it is the temporarily occupied peninsula that has become the main platform for knocking out Russian air defense. Since the beginning of 2025, in no other area of military operations in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine or on the territory of Russia have so many air defense systems been destroyed as in Crimea, the expert emphasizes. In recent times, the primary unit of the Main Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine carried out verified strikes on the following targets: 1 Pantsir S-1 air defense missile and gun system, 2 S-300V air defense missile systems, 1 Tor M2 air defense missile system, 1 9S-15M Obzor 3 radar, 1 ST-68 radar, 1 9S-32 Imbir radar, 2 Castor 2E2 radars. According to him, this is only a part of the confirmed losses of the enemy. Earlier, dozens of air defense systems were destroyed, in particular the S-400 Triumph, PU-5P85SM201, KSHM, R-149, AKSH-1, Radar 96L6-1V, Radar 91N6E and the like. Kovalenko emphasized that the gradual knocking out of Russian air defense in Crimea, which began back in 2024 with the help of ATACMS missiles, has now turned into a more systematic and extremely effective hunt using attack drones. It turned out that Russian air defense systems in Crimea are in an extremely vulnerable position, and their restoration is a complex and lengthy process. The Russian occupiers found themselves in a trap. After all, as practice has shown, their air defense systems in Crimea are in an extremely vulnerable position, and when one of them is destroyed, it is impossible to quickly compensate for it by pulling a new one out of a cylinder like a magician pulling a rabbit. the observer emphasized. The expert drew attention to the fact that the air defense system is one of the most energy-intensive categories of military equipment to produce. For example, India's order from the Russian Federation in 2018 for 11 S-400 divisions, 5 regimental sets, should be fully completed only by 2026. Despite significant losses, the Russians cannot completely withdraw their air defense systems from Crimea, as this would leave the peninsula vulnerable to Ukrainian missiles and drones. Instead, they are forced to transfer air defenses from other regions, including Russia, weakening their own defenses in these areas. According to Kovalenko, the invaders have found themselves in a stalemate on the peninsula. In particular, the enemy cannot leave occupied Crimea without echeloned cover, while at the same time they regularly take out systems that are becoming endangered. The observer compared the situation in Crimea to a black hole that is absorbing Russian air defense, a sort of endless disposal of air defense systems in Crimea, or, for greater aesthetics, the Crimean Ouroboros. At the beginning of 2022, we talked a lot about Chernobylivka. What a black hole, what a hell it turned into for the ROV in 2025. We can already say that Crimea has turned into an inevitable and fatal black hole for the Russian air defense. The analyst adds,